Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all. It's Bear here. And I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, aboxwithnolid, a channel I've created not only to just bring the awareness into the realities complex trauma creates, but I want to delve into the mechanisms behind our traumatic responses to create understandings and to empower healing and the improvement of the quality of all of our lives. Now, in today's video, I want to step into the understandings around developmental trauma, the developmental aspects of complex trauma, which is the follow-on from preverbal. Because once we've learned to communicate, there is the sense of self and there's a sense of engagement. That sense of how do I engage, what is safe to engage, what is safe and what is not safe, that is a developmental stage in a child's life. And if that child is experiencing trauma, those developmental responses are fundamentally altered because of that traumatic environment. Hence the understandings of developmental trauma. What is allowed and what's not, what is safe and what isn't, and how do I survive? When you're looking at infants and young children who are experiencing trauma, the definition is not on a path out, it's on survivability. Because of the helplessness and powerlessness, an infant or young child cannot sustain themselves alone by themselves in their own life. There is always a dependency. So everything is built upon how do I make a connection work to survive, to prolong my survivability. And the coping aspect is around, well, there's nothing else being exposed to, so this is how life is. There is no comparison. An easy example is a lot of people look at, you see African children on TV when they're laughing and playing in the conditions and the life that they live. But that is their life, that is their world. Yes, it's phenomenal that they're able to find some laughter within some stuff that is extremely hard. But that is their world. There isn't the cell phone ideologies of the consumer world. That's not part of their reality. So they can make a stick and turn it into a game because that is their world. And that understanding is why I feel that in the psychology world and in the medical world and in society at large, people think children are resilient, that you can pretty much put them through all this stuff and they'll always bounce back. And as those that have seen, my videos and previous ones on this, it's complete crap. Kids don't bounce back. They just learn ways of responding and surviving, and those ways of responding and surviving have price tags. Like I said in one of the previous videos, every gene expression that's turned on to survive, something gets turned off. Every set of behavior that becomes embedded is at the sacrifice of other behaviors. And as we know with trauma, life becomes very black and white because it has to survive, to be able to cope, to not get neurologically overloaded, to get the lightning storm in the brain and everything overwhelming and so forth and so forth. This is all around the structures of developmental trauma. It's what resources we have and our approach to how we use those resources to respond to survive. And like in the previous video, the way we work with developmental trauma is you have to teach the body and you have to learn different ways of doing things. Again, this is why talking therapies are very good in this area, is because there's nothing you can remember or go back to that worked. That was different from the trauma response because it never developed. This is again where the experiences we have and the environments and engagements and what works and what doesn't, we basically approach this how an infant and a young child does in exploring the world. And that is how you heal and work out ways of resolving the complexity of trauma associated with developmental. Because in those developmental years, what you learn to survive doesn't function well as an adult. And it gives a basis that causes a lot of issues within the interactions that we have and connections and relationships and so forth. As a child, it works. Like, I know with my own experiences, and this is where I'm sort of fumbling a little bit with what I'm saying, is because I'm looking at what is appropriate and what isn't to say. Because I'm also mindful of the triggering aspects associated with developmental trauma, to keep the brain, all of your guys' brain, in the learning part, not in the threat part. Because this is where it gets a little knife edgy, because how we respond doesn't work. We can survive, we know it works, we know it keeps us safe, but it keeps us separate. And when you look at how to work with developmental trauma, we need to find safe ways to push those boundaries. And that's the difficult part. Now, in this modern world, you see it everywhere now. You see people and teens especially with headphones on pretty much 24/7, or noise cancelling little earpieces and so forth. That is a way of working with developmental trauma and that heightened response, that overwhelming response. Whether it's through traumatic experiences or whether it's because of learned isolation from gaming and computer gaming growing up. You have a lot of these kids, they've not experienced trauma, but they can't cope or function in this world because of the isolation from gaming. They're just dealing with a two-dimensional screen. So movement and everything that happens around, they haven't developed ways of engaging and responding, and so that the body can learn what needs to be looked at and what needs to be ignored in versions of safe. So the nervous system gets overloaded and you get what's easily referred to as the lightning storm, and everything starts to shut down. But these noise cancelling headphones, these and earpieces and so forth, they further embed the developmental traumatic responses, because you're not teaching or engaging the world to develop ways of, how am I going to work with it? How am I going to not be so isolated because of how my body responds? If you push too hard, like I know myself, if I hit that wall, if I keep pushing, I'll collapse. I'll start fitting out, because the nervous system literally short circuits, because it just can't respond to everything. It's assessing everything around as a threat. There is no gray area. It's every single thing that's going on, every single movement, every single sound needs to be assessed all at once, and it just can't do it. This is why when I talk about creating the gray areas, this is a part of what the gray areas gives you, is, all the ambient sounds, the majority of them are gray area. They don't need to be individually assessed. It's only the ones that are actually potentially threatening or potentially engageable, as in a positive sense, that need to be assessed. And when we do the noise cancelling and all this stuff, we reinforce constantly. Yes, we need to sometimes, but we also need to teach our nervous system to re-engage with the world. If you look at the vagal video and other videos that I've done, because there is a lot to this, but it's undoing the developmental aspects by learning another way, by creating those gray areas, by teaching our body to respond and assess on a broader scale. It's like learning to use your words, using more words when you learn and increase vocabulary as you get older, other than the basic descriptions of a 3-year-old. It's this thing of expanding the potentials of what we've got access to. And through that, our body has to learn that there are more options, more possibilities, and the responses that are ingrained, that were developed so long ago, need to change. When we get to that point, and it's not in a threat-based way, our body will allow that to change. We will learn better ways of developing and better ways of coping. with the headphone thing, a little trick is you sit there and you just focus on a point on your finger, and do that 20 or 30 times when you take them off, and then move it without moving your head. It's also an aspect of brain spotting. It's a therapeutic process. But it's a way of forcing your body, you're touching things, having the different temperatures and, textures and so forth. It's getting the body to be okay with engaging in an environment that you cannot completely control. That is not just in this little bubble or a chair in front of a screen. That is the easiest way to explain, I guess, the understandings around developmental trauma. Developmental trauma is a very complex and vast when you're looking at it from infant and childhood trauma, because it affects everything. I will do other videos on the attachment aspects and all this, because otherwise these videos would be hours long. But I just wanted to get you guys' understanding. The developmental trauma, which is a term that I use a lot, is you've learned how to because you had no other option. Now that you're choosing to heal, you can create other options. And it's learning that you have those other options to work with, so that your body will accept that there's more options. That is basically, in a nutshell, what I'm trying to explain here. As always, I love your guys' comments and feedbacks. Please be safe, be mindful, be respectful. And I'll see you next time.